Hey there, welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel, and in this video we're going to talk about traps. How to use them, why we use them, and some different types and how they work out, especially in old school games, but I think a lot of this could be translated over into pretty much any game. And we're going to start though with an old school thing, which is what are traps, why do we use them, how do we find them, and then we're going to talk a little bit about why they would even be there and discuss kind of what kind of traps might work best for different scenarios. So let's just start with what are traps, right? I always reference when I'm looking at this stuff the Moldvay or BX system, which is been republished recently as OSC, kind of cleaned it up, made it look more pretty. I still look at the original rules. I like the way they're written, so that's what we're going to look at here. This is basically in the B book, the basic book, and what we're seeing here, if I press the button on it, is traps. Dungeons often contain traps, such as a trapdoor on the floor, which springs open when a character walks over it. If any character does something which could trigger a trap, such as walking over a certain point, the trap will be sprung on a 1 or 2 on a d6. The DM must check for each character passing over the spot until the trap is either sprung or safely passed by all. All trap damage is usually automatic once sprung. Traps are not considered part of combat. Monsters may either have the same chances as characters or might never spring traps. That's up to the DM. Okay, this is important and important thing that people forget, and I love this rule, and I think that I bring it, I do port it into every system I use, and I think it's a good one, which is that a trap doesn't always go off when you walk over it. Basically, these traps, especially in older places, have been, maybe sitting there for a long time, so maybe if it's a pressure trap, maybe the weight doesn't hit it because it's kind of gummed up, or if it's like a tripwire or something, maybe they just happen to step right and they walk right past it without hitting it. There's lots of reasons why a trap might not go off, and I like this idea because then not only does it mean that the first person doesn't always set off the trap, which can be really interesting if like the fourth person in line does, but it also means that it gives a reason the trap might not already be sprung if it's in a place where there's active monsters and stuff. The other thing that's important to remember here, or that I use, it doesn't say here, but this is kind of Daniel's common sense, is that when somebody tells me they are checking ahead with a 10-foot pole and they're kind of bouncing it, or they're explaining what they're doing with it, if it's something that would set the trap off, I roll the 1 or a 2 when the pole crosses that point. So let's say it's a trap door and they're banging hard on the ground. Maybe they hit the pressure plate and the trap door opens 10 feet in front of them safely. So this is the use of the 10-foot pole, and people ask about a lot of it. It could be a tripwire if they hit it. That's really what could break some beam of light or cross some threshold. Unless the trap specifically says something like when a human passes or whatever, there's no reason why the pole shouldn't set it off. And that is the usefulness to me of the 10-foot pole. Also the reason why you might send somebody slightly ahead of the party with the pole so that if they do set it off, that the rest of the party isn't victim to it. But if they're just looking for a trap, it clearly says here, because this is actually one of those things, we're going to talk about thieves in a second. Any character has a 1 in 6 chance of finding a trap when searching for one in the correct area. Any dwarf has a 2 in 6 chance. This does not apply to magical traps such as sleep traps. Checking a specific area, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so now at this point we're talking about, and this is where this gets a little bit funky, and you got to kind of understand the rules as a whole. There are 2 types of traps in a BX or an OSR type game. There are what is distinguished as room traps, which could be hallways, whatever. Those are your things like pits, things like that, where I talk about this. And then there's treasure traps. Treasure trap is like a poison needle on a lock, right? Of a treasure usually, right? So, and I'm not just making this up. If we go over here, this is when now we're in the section called the adventure. If we go to the stalking the dungeon section and we click, there is room traps, treasure traps. Room trap, poison gas, fog, pit, ceiling blow fogs, pendulum blade, shoots, treasure traps, poison needles, darts fired, flash of light, stuff like that, right? Which, by the way, this is one thing I think a lot of people don't do, that everybody puts, because in the example of play, everybody puts a poison needle, save or die on treasure, when I think it's much more fun to put things like a flash of light or a poisonous snake, in the thing, or some kind of spray that, I love this one. Spray, be sprayed with an unknown liquid that attracts wandering monsters, chance doubles. That's so good, right? Or some kind of phantasmal force. So, again, a trap doesn't have, especially a treasure trap, you might want to be like creative, right? Now, when you're doing this, you figure this out. So where does the thief come in? Well, a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll say, well, the thief has their thief chance, and then they also have the 1 in 6 chance they get to roll twice if they're looking for room traps or whatever. I always consider thieves to be looking for treasure traps. And if we look at the thief, it's a little vague, which, of course, is the beauty of OSR type games. Thief is listed chance of finding a trap and same chance of removing it. So it doesn't really say one way or the other. But we do get in the example of play that like Dougal, who's the thief, looks for a trap on a lock. So the implication here is that thieves' trap searching ability is for treasure traps, small traps, poison needles, stuff like that. Anybody can search for a regular trap. And in fact, if a thief is searching for a pit trap in a hallway, they would use the same chance as anybody else. So what does that mean? The person going ahead of you, and I've mentioned this before, the person leading the party into the darkness of a dungeon probably shouldn't be a thief in a BX type game. It probably should be a dwarf. A dwarf can see in the dark with infravision. A dwarf can wear plate mail armor, and the dwarf finds floor traps and stuff. Double the chance that a thief does. So if your thief is going ahead in their leather armor with their D4 hit points and no infravision and they're sneaking ahead, you might want to rethink that. Okay, so now again, things change when you get to like AD&D and like you can have like demi-human thieves and stuff like that. But when you're talking about an OSR game where you're doing racist class, the thief is really not for that. They're not a dungeon scout in the dark. Anyways, that's a whole other video. Okay, so I talked a little bit about what the traps are and what they might. You might find them, right? Find them with traps. The other thing that, again, it's not listed here because, again, I think this was implied, or I know it was implied in the game, especially since in OD&D, which is, essentially where this kind of rolling from, it doesn't really talk about that stuff at all. It basically assumes that you're just going to role play out how you're going to find the traps. So in other words, if somebody is looking for something like a trap, and it's fairly obvious what it might be. Like they're go into a hallway and they're like, I'm going to look on the walls to see if there's anything unusual. And there's a bunch of holes on the wall where like poison gas comes through. You're not going to necessarily say there's a trap there, but you might say there's a bunch of holes on the wall here. And if they want to take a rag and soak it in water and shove it in the hole, and then there is a trap that pushes poison gas through, maybe that will stop it. And they didn't have to roll for anything. And that is the role play, right? ROLE. So keep that in mind as a DM when you're putting traps out there. If the players can figure it out on their own, allow that. Don't make them roll for it if it's there. If they're looking in the right place, they should find it. They should find signs of it. They don't necessarily know what it is. So that's a little aside. That's not in the actual rules, but that's, kind of how we play. Okay. So that's kind of the mechanics of the traps. What I want to talk about now is a little bit more like the philosophy of traps, if you will. So buckle up. When we're putting a trap into our dungeon, I think what we want to do is think about why this trap is there. What is the purpose of the trap? And for instance, to capture people who are coming in, to delay somebody from getting to a place, to kill, right? Possibly not even to kill intruders, but maybe to kill as in like to capture animals so they fall on a trap and they become food, right? To warn, maybe the trap just makes noise, that kind of thing. Or to funnel people in a certain direction. So if you think about, when you're setting up the defenses of a location, it might be that the enemy is going to put traps out that will make the enemy, in this case the player characters probably, not go that way. There'll be a pit with spikes. That's really obvious. Maybe it's easy to see it, and it's going to be hard to get past it. So it's kind of like, well, you know what? We could get past this pit trap. However, it's going to take us a long time. We'll have to crawl down there. It's going to be a risk. But hey, there's another tunnel over here with no traps, and you're funneling the pieces into this. Maybe they're doing that for a reason, right? And of course, you can do the opposite and funnel things into the traps as well if you're chasing them, right? So the traps can be really useful for that. So they can be set up as defensive situations. Again, to capture might be a trap where they fall. Let's say, again, a common one might be nets that fall. Might be sleeping gas. It might be a pit where like they fall into the pit, and then once they fall down, it's like there's like thick mud or something, so it's not maybe enough to drown them, but it'll be hard for them to really get out. And perhaps it makes a lot of noise, which again would come to the warning, right? Sometimes traps might be a tripwire that just sets off some bells. Maybe the bells happen right there, so the characters are aware they set the trap off. Maybe they happen somewhere else, right? Maybe it breaks a tripwire that then pulls a bell in another room, or snuffs a candle, or whatever it might do, so that essentially you're setting it up so that the enemy now knows the PCs are there, right? And of course, to kill is another thing. If they're setting up pit traps to kill, like, let's say, wild animals, it might be a pit with like spikes. If they're setting it up to kill, let's say, player characters, it might be a pit that has acid, right? Or a pool at the bottom with piranha, right? So it depends on what the purpose of the trap is. That should help define what it is. And remember that there needs to always be a way around the traps, because why would the trap be set if there was no way around it? So you've got a chest that's got a poison needle trap on it, but that shouldn't go off if you use a key, right? It might go off if you pick it, but it won't go off if you use the key, because maybe the key presses something special on the back, right? It also probably wouldn't go off if you went around the back of the chest and knocked out the little pins in the hinge and took the top off the wrong way, right? Or if you cut the top off of it, or if you smash the lock off with your warhammer. But if you do all those things and there's something fragile inside, you might damage it. So the advantage of finding the trap and removing it, but gently by the thief, is that you're not going to damage the contents inside. But there's lots of ways that a player should be able to have their character bypass a trap without having to roll a remove trap roll. So depending on what the trap is, that could be the way. Like I mentioned, the rag sticking in the hole. If it's some kind of, if you're going to open a chest, and there's the trap with the needle shooting or dart shooting out, well, you stand behind it and you open it this way, right? And they go flying out and they shoot across the room and they don't affect you, right? These are all ways to get around a trap. You need to make it so that the trap is accessible by whoever set it. And that's where we come down to kind of the second to last thing here is, who put this trap here? Is the trap from the people that are living there now? Let's say you've got this old underground fortress that was built by an ancient race a long time ago, and there's rooms that are hidden in there, and there's like a chest in there that was left by an old warlord with some magic sword inside of it. The key to that chest might be long lost, right? So maybe there was potentially a way to get into it before, but there's not anymore. But if it's the current ogre that is living in this cave and they have a chest with something hidden inside of it, they probably have the key, right? So who set these traps up makes a big difference. If it's the current group of kobolds living in this dungeon that set the pit trap, maybe they just dug it out, right? So it's going to be a rough pit dug out, and there's going to be spikes inside or whatever, and maybe they're going to have wooden planks on the other side of it, or maybe around a corner so you can't see them. But I like on the other side, because then the player's always like, oh, what's going on here? Obvious pit planks on the other side, right? And maybe when they climb down, because that would be a smart thing to do, right? Climb down to get to the other side, go back up. Again, maybe it's just a delaying trap, or when we get down to the bottom, maybe that somehow signals the kobolds that they're there. Or at the bottom, there's, mixed into the leaves and stuff are some snakes, right? Poison snakes. So, the trap can be a lot of different things. And you need to think about who set the trap and what the reason for it to be there is. Is it to prevent them from getting across? And if it is, then the kobolds would need to have their own way to get back, right? If it's a trap where you step on a pressure plate and it shoots a bunch of arrows down the corridor, well, then the pressure plate can't be the entire width, because how else would you get past it? Unless there's a lever that you can swing, and that allows you to deactivate the trap, right? Or to activate it, more likely, right? So when you go past this pressure plate, you throw the switch, and then it's activated, and anybody who comes after you gets the trap, right? So if somebody can get to the other side, or use a rope, or do however they're going to do it, they can deactivate the trap. The traps need to have ways that they can be overcome by the people that put the traps there. And that means that possibly they won't have a way if it's an ancient tomb and they're long lost, or it means that there will if it's somebody current that put them there. So think about that. Who put these traps there, and for what reason? So all that being said and done, where do we put traps? Like many things in D&D, I think the trick to this is really to put enough traps to make sure that it's interesting, and also the players don't feel like they're wasting their time looking for them. In other words, if you have 5 adventures in a row with no traps, player characters will stop searching because they won't think that there'll be traps, right? It's just the nature of it. They're going to forget to do it. And then if you suddenly spring a trap on them, That's playing a little dirty, I think. You have traps be part of your game often enough that people realize they're there. And if it's something you don't normally use and you want to start using, then you need to have some signs. Like one very, tropey thing that I do a lot is when I'm designing a dungeon that's going to have a lot of traps in it, early on, there will be a trap that's already been sprung with some kind of dead or skeleton or whatever. I got this from the very famous B3 Lost City. When you go to the top of the temple and the adventure starts, there's basically somebody who's dead there that got shot, I think, with a poison needle or poison arrow, and they're like holding the secret door open. So immediately that tells the players there's secret doors in this place, that there's traps, right? So you're telegraphing that kind of stuff is going to happen. But if you never have traps ever, and then suddenly you have a trap-filled place with no warning, I'd be a little careful doing that kind of stuff. So, in short, I felt like I was wrapping up there for a second. Traps are great. They can be really fun, but they don't always have to be deadly. They don't always have to be for the purpose of killing, and they don't always need to be discovered just in case you were thinking this spy, right? And it's really fun to make the traps somewhat obvious in places where maybe if I'm a kobold and I make a trap early, like at the entrance of my lair, because that's designed to capture some animals, right? So they can eat them. It might be as simple as a pit trap with like a 5-foot drop with spikes, or 10-foot drop maybe with spikes, and then just like leaves and stuff over the top, like branches, right, that can easily be broken, and some meat dangling above it, right, or right on the other side of it. So a player character walking in and seeing clearly a pit there with meat on the other side is going to be able to avoid that, no problem. This then becomes something that they can just get past. But now, let's say they're running out of the place being chased by 50 kobolds. Now they still have to deal with this thing that's right there blocking the entrance. So now it's served as a delay trap. So sometimes they can have different purposes depending on how the players encounter them. What I want to know from you is, what is your favorite trap? How often do you use traps? Do you ever use traps? Do you have any special rules that you do yourself? I would love to know more about your traps. Put some comments below about that. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you get the notifications. And I'll see you next time.